Timothy Hutton, you are on the show American Crime, which just concluded its third and unfortunately final season. How did this project end up in front of you, and what about this project made it stand out?
Well, it started for me 3 years ago. I read a script. The agency that represents me, I asked them if they could send me what, in their view, was the best pilot scripts that they had. This was 3 years ago, and they sent me like 4 or 5 scripts, and among them was American Crime, the pilot that John Ridley wrote. And I read all of them, and the one that really, they were all great, but the one that really stood out for me, that was exceptionally great, was American Crime. Just the character and all the characters, the setting, what John was speaking about, and the conflict within the characters, the dialogue, of course, the main story, all of it, all the different issues that it touched upon. So I called someone at the agency back, and I said, well, I love this American Crime script. Are they casting? I tried to get as much information as I could about it. And he said, no, they're not casting right now. And I said, well, is there any way that I could meet John Ridley? And anyway, that's how it kind of came about. They said, well, we'll see. I said, well, I'm in New York. I imagine he's in LA, but I'd love to just sit down with him for 10 minutes just to tell him how much I love the script. And that's how it happened. They got back to me and said, John will meet you. It was a couple of days later. And so I flew out to LA and went over to Disney Studios, where he had an office there, and spoke to him about the script. And we had a great conversation, and nothing immediately came out of the meeting. It was a couple of weeks. I expressed how much I wanted to be a part of the project, but they weren't in the process of casting that role at that time. So it's just a matter of me reading it, really liking it so much, and the part, and then at that point, it was only meant to be a limited series for 1 year, and that was it. But as we were shooting, anyway, a couple of weeks went by, and I got a call asking if I wanted to be a part of it, and I was so happy to get that call. And we went to Austin, Texas, and we started filming. And then toward the end of filming in Austin, John and Michael McDonald, the other executive producer, decided they wanted to, and ABC decided they wanted to make another season. And they came to people in the cast and asked us if we'd want to be a part of another season, a whole new story with new character. So anyway, 3 years, here we are. Unfortunately, it was canceled, but it was an incredible 3 years. And to work with these incredible writers and actors, it was really a dream job.
And it really was so amazing, those 3 seasons. I'm curious, do you have a personal favorite of the 3 seasons in terms of the season as a whole?
Well, I don't know. I mean, when we were filming the 3rd season last fall, because it was the most current, I guess, that I was focused on that, and that was the favorite. But now, with a little bit of distance, there was nothing like the first season. We all came together. It was new. There was something very raw about it, and so, but then again, I think about the 2nd season and that story and that character, and working with the people I got to work with, like Hope Davis, and some new people that came into it. So I don't know. I'm not really answering it. I mean, I guess if I were pressed to have an answer, I'd say the first season.
Yeah, it's interesting. For the 2nd season last year, I got to interview Joey Polari, who you did quite a bit with last year. And that's my personal favorite season. I thought that one was so, I don't even know have the words to describe it. It was so intense and raw for me, and I loved it. I thought it was sensational.
Yeah. It was great. It was incredible to work on that one. And like I said, and then we all came back together to work on the 3rd season, and that became the primary one. So,
is there a Is there there are some very specific moments from the series that, you know, they kind of stand out, and they stand on their own, as like just these moments that just get you. They hook you in. And I was wondering, is there a specific moment from either this past season or one of the previous two seasons that really for you is like a truly standout one that really, you know, shows the brilliance of the show?
Well, I think throughout the show there are so many incredible uh, scenes that happen. You know, different storylines, different parts of the story. The way the show is shot from the very beginning. I mean, I think early on a standout scene was in terms of the way it was shot and just the emotion that happens in the scene. What we learn in the scene is the scene with Felicity Huffman and I when we're driving in a car, and then she jumps out of the car, and we have this fight, you know, on the sidewalk, and it was done in, you know, in one camera angle. There was no coverage on it. It just was this one shot that just took us from the car outside and then followed us all the way through. And you know, I would say that, and then I think about this past season, for me, a personal favorite, and just in terms of the way it was written and the way Ramsey, the director, was also the cinematographer, the way he shot it was a scene in a pool hall with Lily Taylor and I and a couple of friends.
Yes.
But then, you know, I think about Benito, and I think about Regina this year and the scenes that she had. And then I go back to Caitlin Gerard and Elvis Nolasco and their scenes together in the first season. You know, it's different, I think, when you're in it, because you're not really impacted by watching it. You're impacted by working in it and within it and with the people and experiencing it perhaps differently. But when I've watched the episodes, I'm struck by how amazing the writing is, the acting, these incredible actors that we all got to work with, the cinematography, the sound design, the editing, the way that the sort of visual playbook, the visual way in which visual signature that the show has, very unusual at times, way in which the story is told visually. So I don't know. I feel very fortunate to have been a part of it.
One of the things I was curious about, you bring up the very interesting way that it's shot, and how when you watch an episode, I think one of the trademarks of the show is where you hear dialogue that's being spoken, but you're not seeing exactly what's happening as it's happening. You're seeing like something that's in the lead up, and then and at the same time you're hearing dialogue, and then it jumps into that scene. Is that how it's written? Is it written like that in the script, or in terms of like what's heard at different points, or is that something that's done later in post?
A lot of that happens in post. A lot of that is done in the editing room. Sometimes you can see that in the script, but very rarely. Sometimes you'll film an entire scene, and then the camera's on you and on the other actors in the scene, and then when you see the program put together, it's just as you're saying, it's just your dialogue over something else, and it's very compelling. It's a very interesting way to present story and character and conflict, because it's not conventional. It's not what we're used to seeing. We're not used to hearing dialogue over something else. We're used to seeing a person's face, and then cut to the other person, and I think that has kind of numbed storytelling in some ways, if it's just sort of routine like that. But when it gets shaken up a little bit, as American Crime does, the way you're suggesting, and also another thing that American Crime does, it'll either do what you're saying sometimes, or the camera will just stay on one person, and you don't see the other. It doesn't cut to the other person in the scene. It just stays on the one person, and makes it sometimes wonderfully awkward and uncomfortable. And again, very compelling. It brings you in, it draws you in a way that a conventional way of visually telling a story just wouldn't do.
And yeah, it kind of reminds me of the filmmaking style of Robert Altman.
Yeah.
Speaking of Altman, one of the things that he was also known for, in addition to that sort of thing, was also these great ensembles that he would work with. And man, does American Crime have a solid ensemble? I mean, I wonder what's it like to to work within that and to bring that energy, but also have to rely on all these other parts and have it all in this cohesive thing. I mean, what's that experience like?
Well, it's an incredible experience from the first season. All of us got to work with not just fellow cast, but the crew as well. It's a total experience of working with people that really are very good at what they do. And so you walk onto a set like that and you just have this immediate kind of trust and you're relaxed. You don't even think about whether things are going to go smoothly or not, because everybody is just so focused and prepared. So, working with these amazing people, Felicity and Lily and Hope Davis and Regina and all the way, every single one of them is quite something, because you're allowed to just kind of hopefully become focused yourself and contribute equally in a strong way. So you really are challenged, because you're working with such good people, to come extremely ready and prepared, and also it's a group of people, the directors, the writers, and all the actors, that were always willing to mix it up and try different things. So nobody felt locked into boxes, and that made for a very exciting work environment.
Do you know if John Ridley had any ideas as to what he wanted to do if the show had gotten renewed? If there was any potential ideas he had for season 4, and if not, was there a subject that you were hoping that the show might tackle in future seasons?
Well, I don't know what John had in mind. I heard Michael McDonald speak about if there were to be a 4th season, he was interested in, and perhaps he was speaking for John. I don't know, or maybe it was just something that he thought would be interesting. But he was talking about sexual harassment in the work environment, and sexual predators, and things that we've certainly have been in the news. Quite a bit. That was something that Michael was talking about. I think it was a couple of years ago, talking to John about possibilities for future seasons, and we were talking about the healthcare world and system, and mental health, and health insurance, and the politics of that, and the lobbying that goes into that, and so that's certainly something that's been in the news as well, and is certainly concern for many people. But that whole world of that was something that was an interesting discussion on the set one day.
So being a part of a big ensemble, you do get to work with some actors, but you get to work with some more than others. I was wondering if there was an actor in the ensemble that you wish you could have had more screen time with.
Yeah, Regina King.
Yes, her scenes are absolutely stellar.
No question. We had one scene. We had one scene together last year, because she played the mother of one of the basketball players. So we had one scene together last year, but that's it. There was another scene outside a courtroom in the first season, but we didn't have any real interaction in that scene. That was a confrontation between Felicity's character and Regina's character. But I would say her. But I mean, the same thing with Benito. It would be great. I didn't have any scenes with him. Richard, I was so happy last year to be able to do a scene with Richard Cabral. That was really fun. And then I only had one scene with Elvis in Elvis in Alaska in the first season, which really wasn't a scene as much as a sort of a tragic occurrence.
Yeah, that was definitely that was yeah, that you had that one scene, and it's at the end of the finale of season 1,
Yeah.
and that's one where I had to rewind and go, wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that probably? I'm wondering what was the just a one last question. Was that like the biggest shock of any of the sort of, I guess I don't want to say twists because that sounds so conventional, but in terms of like left turns that you might not be expecting, was that the biggest one for you of all the scripts?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was. I had heard about certain details of that last scene fairly early on. John Ridley told me about something that was going to occur along those lines. But when we all got the scripts were redacted, so we didn't see that scene. Nobody saw exactly how that scene was written and how it was going to play out. And even on the day that we shot that scene, and of course I'm talking about the scene at the end of season 1 where the character Russ finds the person he believes killed his son, Elvis and Alasko's characters. And again, that was the way that was shot. That was one take and one camera setup, one angle. That's it. No additional pieces of filming were done, and it was done in one take. And the crew didn't know what that scene was going to be. They didn't know. It was all set up and ready to be staged. And John had a couple of decoys on the set. Characters that were in the story were on the set, and they were lining up the shot. And I was sort of smuggled onto the set in a van, covered. And at the very last moment, John sent me out there, and he had talked to me at great length, and Elvis, about what we were going to do, and had somebody walk the exact path. So everybody in the camera department knew what was going to happen. They just didn't know which character was going to actually take the action. So it was very, very well planned and organized down to every little last detail, so that there would be a surprise.
That's unbelievable. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, Timothy, I cannot thank you enough for speaking with us about the show. The show is absolutely fantastic, and we wish you nothing but the best in the upcoming award season.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely.
All right.